My son cut me off from his life for 20 years, didn't speak to me, ignored all my attempts to contact me until I became rich. Suddenly he invited me to Christmas as if nothing had happened. But I had a plan. When I arrived at his house, I smiled and said, "I have a surprise for you." Their faces shone with greed, waiting for my money, but when they saw what I had prepared for them, their faces turned pale and their smiles disappeared. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The phone rang just as I was settling into my evening routine, the shrill sound cutting through the December silence of my Lincoln home like a blade. I almost didn't answer. Telemarketers had a way of calling right at dinner time, but something made me reach for the receiver. "Dad?" The voice hit me like a physical blow. 20 years. 20 years of silence, and now this casual greeting as if we'd spoken yesterday. "Nicholas." My voice came out steady, though my knuckles had gone white around the phone. "This is unexpected." "Yeah, well," I could hear that familiar nervous laugh, the one he'd used as a child when caught in a lie. "Listen, I know it's been a while, but Christmas is coming up, and Madeline and I were talking. We'd love to have you over for dinner. You know, family time." Family time. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. I stared at the faded family photo on my kitchen table, the one where Nicholas was 8, gap-toothed and smiling, before everything fell apart. "A while?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "Nicholas, you haven't returned my calls in 2 decades. Do you remember the birthday cards I sent? The graduation invitation I mailed? They all came back unopened." "Dad, come on. I've been busy. You know how it is. Building a career. Starting a family. There's never enough time." "Never enough time." I stood up, pacing the small kitchen. Outside, Christmas lights twinkled mockingly in neighbors' windows. But suddenly, now there's time. Right after the news about my lottery win hit the papers. A pause. Too long. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" I kept my voice deliberately calm. $15 million. Front page of the Lincoln Journal-Star last month. Quite a coincidence, this sudden invitation. "Dad, that's not... I mean, I'm happy for you, but that's not why I'm calling. We just thought it would be nice to reconnect. You're getting older, and I'm getting older." I almost laughed. "I've been getting older for 20 years, Nicholas. Where were you when I had my heart surgery? When I spent Christmas alone in this empty house, year after year?" His voice shifted, defensive now. "Look, I know things haven't been perfect between us, but that's in the past. We're family. That has to count for something." Family. The word hung between us like a curse. I thought of all the times I'd sat by this same phone, hoping it would ring. All the unanswered messages, the returned letters, the birthdays, spent in silence. "You're right," I said finally. "Family does count for something. I'll be there." "Really? That's great, Dad. Christmas Eve, around 6? I'll text you the address." "You do that." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "And Nicholas, I have a surprise for you." "A surprise?" His voice brightened, and I could practically hear the dollar signs in his tone. "What kind of surprise?" "You'll see." I hung up before he could respond. I set the phone down carefully, my hands trembling just slightly. The kitchen felt different now, charged with possibility. Outside, snow had begun to fall, dusting the quiet streets of Lincoln with white. I stood there for a long moment, staring at nothing, my mind drifting back to the last time I'd seen my son's face. It had been so long ago, but some wounds never truly heal. They just wait, buried under years of resignation and quiet dignity, until the right moment comes to reveal themselves. I walked to the window, watching the snow fall, and remembered how it all began. The snow reminded me of that December 20 years ago, when everything I'd built came crashing down. I'd been sitting in this same kitchen, though the house had felt different then, warmer, filled with the promise of family. Madeline had been packing, her suitcases spread across our bedroom floor like open wounds. "You're pathetic, Stanley." Her voice echoed in my memory, sharp and cruel. 45 years old, and what do you have to show for it? A dead-end job at Morrison and Associates, a mortgage we can barely afford, and dreams that'll never come true. I remembered standing in the doorway, watching her fold clothes with mechanical precision. "I thought we were happy." "Happy?" She'd laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "When was the last time you surprised me with anything? When did you last take me somewhere nice? Robert treats me like a queen. Robert, her new boyfriend, the one with the BMW in the corner office, the one who'd been calling our house for months before I finally understood what was happening. What about Nicholas? I'd asked, grasping at straws. He needs stability. He needs his father. He needs a winner for a father. She'd slammed the suitcase shut. All you've ever been is a disappointment. The divorce had been swift and brutal. Madeline's lawyer had been expensive. Mine overworked and underpaid. She'd walked away with the house, the car, and our son's loyalty. I'd moved into this small rental in Lincoln, starting over at 45, with nothing but my accounting job and the bitter taste of betrayal. Nicholas had been 18 then, old enough to choose sides. He'd chosen hers without hesitation. Mom's right, he'd said during one of our last conversations, his voice cold with teenage certainty. You're just making excuses. Maybe if you'd tried harder, been more successful, none of this would have happened. I'd tried to explain, to make him understand, but he'd already decided. The stepfather had money, influence, connections. What did I have? A small apartment and a broken heart. 20 years of silence followed. 20 years of birthday cards returned unopened, of phone calls that went straight to voicemail, of Christmas mornings spent alone in this quiet house. I'd learned to live with the emptiness, to find meaning in small things. My work, my books, the occasional kindness of neighbors. But I'd never stopped hoping, never stopped believing that someday my son would remember the man who'd taught him to ride a bike, who'd stayed up all night when he had pneumonia, who'd loved him unconditionally, even when love wasn't enough. The lottery win had changed everything. $15 million, tax-free from a ticket I'd bought on a whim at Casey's General Store. The story had made the local news, then the state papers. Within a week, my phone had started ringing again. Old friends I hadn't heard from in years, distant relatives I'd forgotten existed. And then today the call I'd been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. I walked to my desk and pulled out the folder I'd been assembling for months. Bank statements, investment records, legal documents, everything I'd need for Christmas Eve. Everything I'd need to show my son exactly what kind of man his father had become. The snow continued to fall outside, covering Lincoln in pristine white. Soon, very soon, I'd have my chance to give Nicholas and Madeline the surprise they'd been waiting for, but something told me it wouldn't be quite what they expected. I smiled to myself, closing the folder. 20 years was a long time to wait for justice, but some things I'd learned were worth the wait. The isolation had been my teacher, though I hadn't realized it at the time. After the divorce, when the loneliness settled into my bones, like Lincoln's winter cold, I'd needed something to fill the endless hours. That's when I'd discovered my gift for numbers, not just the accounting kind, but the kind that could build empires from dust. It started with a foreclosure notice I'd seen in the Lincoln Journal-Star back in 2008. A small duplex on the south side, nothing special, but the price caught my eye. While everyone else was running scared from the housing market, I saw opportunity. I drove past the property on my lunch break, noting the solid bones beneath the peeling paint and overgrown yard. That night, I spread newspaper clippings across my kitchen table, yellowed edges curling in the lamplight. Mortgage rates, property values, market predictions. I devoured them all like a starving man. The old wooden chair creaked under my weight as I leaned forward, calculating risks on the back of utility bills. You sure about this, Mr. Brooks? The banker had looked at me over his glasses, skeptical. Real estate's a dangerous game right now. I'm sure. I'd signed the papers with steady hands, though my heart was pounding. It was every penny I'd saved since the divorce, plus a small loan against my modest retirement account. The duplex became my evening project. I'd drive there after work, tools rattling in my trunk, and spend hours scraping paint, fixing leaks, replacing rotted boards. The physical labor felt good, purposeful. For the first time in years, I was creating something instead of just surviving. 6 months later, I had tenants. Good people, a young couple starting out, grateful for clean walls and working plumbing. The rent covered my mortgage with a small profit left over. I reinvested immediately, buying another property, then another. The Great Recession was my golden opportunity. While others lost fortunes, I built mine quietly, one careful purchase at a time. I learned to read neighborhoods like books, to spot potential where others saw only problems. The midnight calculations became routine, spreadsheets glowing on my computer screen, tracking income and expenses with methodical precision. By 2015, I owned 12 properties across Lincoln. By 2020, 23. I lived in the same small rental, drove the same reliable Honda, wore the same modest clothes. But beneath the surface, I was accumulating power, the kind that came from smart decisions made in patient solitude. The lottery win had been luck, sure, but it landed on a foundation I'd built through discipline and determination. $15 million added to what I'd already earned through sweat and strategy. I was worth more than Nicholas could imagine, more than Madeline would ever believe possible. I glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. The snow had stopped falling, leaving Lincoln wrapped in pristine silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that the quiet man they'd dismissed as a failure had become something else entirely. Did Nicholas know the full extent of what I'd accomplished? Did he understand that his father wasn't just lucky but smart? I doubted it. In his mind, I was still the broken man who'd lost everything 20 years ago. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned to turn loneliness into strength, failure into triumph. The house settled around me with familiar sounds. I had work to do, plans to finalize. Christmas Eve was approaching, and I intended to be ready. Morning came with fresh snow dusting the windows, and I was sipping coffee at my kitchen table when the phone rang again. The sound made me pause, cup halfway to my lips. 2 calls in 2 days, after 2 decades of silence. "Stanley!" Madeline's voice hit me like a cold wind, still that same breathy tone she'd used when she wanted something, though age had roughened the edges. "I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Nicholas." I set my coffee down carefully. "Madeline, how thoughtful of you to reach out. Listen, I know things ended badly between us, but we have a son together. That has to count for something, right? Nicholas is in trouble, Stanley. Real trouble. He needs help, and I thought, well, with your recent good fortune..." I could hear rustling in the background, whispers. Then Nicholas's voice, faint but clear. "Ask for more. Tell him it's urgent." "What kind of trouble?" I kept my voice neutral, though my grip tightened on the receiver. "His business, you know how it is. The startup world is so volatile. He's got investors breathing down his neck, and if he doesn't come up with the money soon..." She let the sentence hang. "I hate to ask, but could you help? For old time's sake?" More whispers. "Say it's for the grandkids' future." "It's for the grandkids' future," Madeline continued, her voice taking on that pleading quality I remembered from our marriage. "You don't want them to suffer because of business problems, do you?" I watched the steam rise from my coffee cup, thinking of all the times I'd fallen for this routine. The manufactured crises, the emotional manipulation, the way she'd always known exactly which buttons to push. "How much?" I asked. "Well, 200,000 would cover the immediate problems, but if you could stretch to 300..." Another whisper. "Maybe 400, just to be safe." I almost laughed. $400,000 asked for as casually as borrowing sugar from a neighbor. "I see. Stanley, I know you're angry about the past, but this is bigger than our problems. This is about family, about doing what's right." "What's right?" I repeated the word slowly. "Tell me, Madeline, what was right about 20 years of silence? What was right about returning birthday cards unopened? What was right about teaching our son to treat his father like a stranger?" Her voice hardened. "That's ancient history. We're talking about now, about your son's future." "I won't give you a cent." The words came out cleaner than I'd expected, without anger or bitterness, just fact. "What?" She sounded genuinely shocked. "Stanley, you can't be serious. You won millions of dollars. What's a few $100,000 to help your own son?" "Not a cent," I repeated. "Not now, not ever." But you love him. You're his father. How can you just abandon him when he needs you most?" I thought of all the times I'd needed them, all the reaching out that had been ignored. I learned from the best. "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this." "I don't think I will." The line went dead. She'd hung up on me just like that. I set the phone down and watched the snow continue to fall outside my window. The silence felt different now, Not empty, but full of possibility, I'd passed the test. 20 years ago, I would have written the check, desperate to buy back their affection. But the man I'd become understood something the old Stanley never had. Respect couldn't be purchased, and love that came with a price tag wasn't love at all. I finished my coffee and began planning my next move. Christmas Eve was still days away, but I had a feeling my son and his mother weren't done with their little scheme. That was fine. I'd waited 20 years for this moment. I could wait a little longer to see exactly how far they'd go. The phone sat silent on the table, and I found myself almost hoping it would ring again, because each call made my Christmas surprise a little sweeter, a little more justified. They thought they were dealing with the same broken man who'd lost everything decades ago. They had no idea who they were really up against. Sleep evaded me that night, and by dawn I knew what I had to do. The morning light cast long shadows across my kitchen floor as I sat with my coffee, staring at the phone. One more test. One final confirmation of what I already suspected. I picked up the receiver and dialed Nicholas's number, my fingers steady despite the weight of what I was about to do. "Dad?" He sounded surprised, maybe even pleased. "I didn't expect to hear from you so soon." "I've been thinking about what your mother said yesterday. About your problems." "Oh, that?" His voice shifted, becoming more guarded. "She probably made it sound worse than it is. You know how she worries." I leaned back in my chair, watching the winter wind rattle my windows. "Actually, Nicholas, I called because I have some problems of my own." "Problems?" "Financial ones." I let the words hang in the air, noting how his breathing changed. "I'm afraid I made some terrible decisions with my lottery winnings. Got caught up in cryptocurrency trading, you know? Bitcoin, Ethereum, all those digital currencies everyone was talking about." "Oh, no." But his tone wasn't sympathetic. It was calculating. "How bad is it?" "Pretty bad. Lost most of it in a market crash last week. Volatile investments, they warned me, but I thought I knew better." I paused, letting him absorb this fabrication. I might have enough left to cover Christmas dinner, but not much more. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the hum of the phone line. I could almost hear his thoughts shifting, recalibrating. "Well," he said finally, his voice cooler than Nebraska winter. That's really unfortunate, Dad. I guess these things happen." "They do?" I waited, giving him a chance to offer comfort, support, anything that might resemble filial concern. "So, about Christmas." He cleared his throat. "Maybe it would be better if you didn't come this year. I mean, with everything you're dealing with, you probably need to focus on getting your finances sorted out." There it was, the mask slipping completely away. "I see." I kept my voice neutral, though inside I felt a cold satisfaction. "So the invitation is off the table?" "It's just, you understand, right? Madeline's been planning this big meal, and we were kinda counting on... Well, anyway, it's probably better this way. Less stress for everyone." "Less stress?" I nodded to myself. "Of course. I wouldn't want to burden you with my presence." "Dad, don't be like that. It's just practical. When you get back on your feet, we'll definitely get together." "When I get back on my feet." I smiled grimly. "Right. Look, I have to run. Conference call in 5 minutes, but we'll talk soon, okay?" The line went dead before I could respond. I set the phone down and stared out at the snow-covered streets of Lincoln. 20 years of silence, and the moment they thought I was broke again, it was back to radio silence. I'd known it would happen, but having it confirmed so brutally still stung. Not because I was surprised, but because it crystallized everything I'd suspected about their motives. Love with conditions wasn't love at all. It was a business transaction. I walked to the window and pressed my palm against the cold glass. Outside, my neighbors were already starting their day, warming up cars, shoveling driveways. Normal people living normal lives, probably taking for granted the simple fact that their families loved them for who they were, not what they had. The test was complete. The jury had delivered their verdict. Now it was time to plan the sentencing. With that clarity, I spent the afternoon digging into the lives my son and ex-wife had built while ignoring mine. If they wanted to play games, I needed to understand the rules. I started with my old Lincoln business network, contacts I'd made during my real estate ventures. A few phone calls revealed interesting information about Nicholas's startup, or rather, its spectacular failure. Brooks Tech Solutions, Jim Patterson from the Chamber of Commerce laughed bitterly. That kid burned through investor money like it was confetti, promised revolutionary software, delivered nothing but excuses and expensive lunches. What happened to the investors? They're not happy. Word is he owes close to $2 million between the venture capital firm and private backers. Some of them are getting lawyers involved. I made notes on a legal pad, my accountant's mind automatically organizing the information. $2 million in debt. That explained the desperation. The internet provided the rest of the puzzle. Nicholas's LinkedIn showed a string of failed ventures, each one lasting just long enough to attract funding before collapsing. His Instagram painted a picture of lavish lifestyle, expensive restaurants, luxury cars, designer clothes, all funded by other people's money. But it was Madeline's Facebook that truly disgusted me. Her profile showed a woman playing the victim with masterful precision, photos of herself looking wan and tired, coupled with posts about her brave battle against cancer. Day 47 of chemo, read one post from last month. The treatments are draining, but your donations keep me fighting. Every dollar helps with medical bills and experimental treatments my insurance won't cover. I scrolled through months of similar posts, each one more manipulative than the last. Thousands of dollars in donations from well-meaning strangers, all based on a lie. Because I knew Madeline wasn't sick, she was just greedy. A quick search of Lincoln Hospital records through a contact who worked in administration confirmed my suspicions. No cancer treatments, no chemotherapy, not even a suspicious mole removal. I cross-referenced her posts with Nicholas's spending patterns on social media. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Every major donation spike coincided with Nicholas posting about a new business opportunity or expensive purchase. They were working together, a mother and son team, bleeding money from strangers while ignoring the man who'd actually earned his wealth through honest work. I compiled everything into a folder, the same methodical approach I'd used for my real estate investments. Bank records, social media screenshots, testimonials from burned investors. A paper trail that painted a clear picture of systematic fraud and emotional manipulation. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd dismissed me as a failure, a man not worth their time or attention. But that same man had built a fortune through patience and strategy, while they'd built nothing but debt and deception. I closed my laptop as evening fell over Lincoln, the screen's glow fading into darkness. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new pieces of the puzzle. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was becoming the author. The phone rang again, probably another desperate attempt to squeeze money from their rich father. I let it ring, listening to the sound echo through my quiet house. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Christmas was still days away, and I had work to do. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing Lincoln in white. Clean, pure, ready for a fresh start. Dawn brought focus, and I reached for the phone before my morning coffee had finished brewing. The notes from yesterday's research lay spread across my kitchen table like a battle plan. Time to see just how far my son's greed would take him. Nicholas answered on the second ring. "Dad, this is unexpected. Twice in 2 days?" "I have good news," I said, settling into my chair. "Remember those cryptocurrency investments I told you about? The ones that wiped me out?" "Yeah." His voice carried a note of wariness, as if he suspected where this was heading. "Well, I managed to recover most of it. Day trading, you know. Bought the dip and rode it back up. Turned out better than I expected." The silence stretched for exactly 3 seconds. I counted. That's fantastic, Dad. I'm so relieved. I was worried about you." The lie came so easily to him. Not a hint of shame or embarrassment about how quickly he'd dismissed me when he thought I was broke. "So I was thinking," I continued, "maybe Christmas is back on, if the invitation still stands?" Of course it does. Madeline will be thrilled. She's been looking forward to seeing you." Another lie. I could hear the calculations clicking behind his words like an old cash register. "Actually, Dad, speaking of Christmas," his voice shifted, becoming more intimate, more son-like. "I know this is awkward to bring up, but since you mentioned your financial recovery, I was wondering if you might consider helping me with something." I smiled grimly. "Oh, It's this business opportunity. Time sensitive, you know? The kind of deal that could set me up for life, but I need to move quickly. 300,000 would cover my entry stake. 300,000. Not a loan request. A demand wrapped in opportunity speak. That's a significant amount, Nicholas. I know. I know. But Dad, this isn't just about me. It's about securing the family's future. Your grandchildren's future. And honestly, after everything that's happened between us, I thought this might be a way to, you know, start fresh. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Family, grandchildren, fresh starts, all the buttons he thought would work on the man I used to be. Tell me more about this opportunity, I said, injecting just enough interest to keep him talking. It's in the tech sector, AI development, actually. Revolutionary stuff. The initial investors are projecting returns of 500% within 18 months. The same pitch he'd probably used on his previous victims. I wondered if he'd even bothered to change the numbers. 500%? That sounds almost too good to be true. I know it sounds crazy, but Dad, that's how these breakthrough technologies work. Remember when Bitcoin was nothing? The people who got in early made fortunes. I let the silence hang between us, as if I were genuinely considering it. In truth, I was marveling at how completely he'd revealed himself. No mention of paying me back. No acknowledgement of the 20 years of silence. Just his hand out, palm up, waiting. I'll need to think about it, I said finally. Of course, but Dad, time really is a factor here. The window closes after Christmas. So if you're going to do this, we'd need to move fast. The urgency was manufactured, of course. Create pressure, eliminate time for second thoughts. Classic con artist tactics. I understand. Let me sleep on it. That's all I can ask. And Dad, thanks for even considering it. It means everything to me. I hung up and sat back in my chair, watching the morning sunlight glint off my notepad. He'd taken the bait completely. No suspicion, no questions about how I'd recovered my losses so quickly. Just pure, undiluted greed. I picked up my pen and wrote a single word. Confirmed. 20 years of silence, and now he wanted $300,000, based on a 5-minute phone call. The audacity was almost admirable in its brazenness. Almost. I glanced at my watch. The business day was just beginning, and I had other calls to make, other pieces to put in place. Nicholas thought he was playing me, but he had no idea the game had already begun. With that bait set, I turned to the contacts I'd compiled during yesterday's research. The investors Nicholas had burned deserved to know where their money had gone, and where the man who'd taken it was hiding. I started with the venture capital firm first. The receptionist transferred me to a Mr. Davidson, who sounded tired even at 9 in the morning. You're calling about Nicholas Brooks? His voice sharpened. What's your connection to him? I'm someone who believes in accountability, I said carefully. I understand he owes your firm a considerable amount of money. Considerable is an understatement. We're talking about deliberate fraud, but he's vanished. No forwarding address, no contact information. Our lawyers are frustrated. What if I told you I knew exactly where he was? Davidson's chair squeaked as he leaned forward. I'm listening. Lincoln, Nebraska. He's been hiding there for months, living at his mother's house while planning his next scheme. I provided the address, phone number, and social media evidence I'd gathered. Davidson's excitement was palpable. How do you know all this? Let's just say I have a personal interest in seeing justice done. After Davidson, I contacted the 3 private investors Nicholas had named on his failed company's registration documents. Their reactions were remarkably similar. Initial skepticism, followed by barely contained rage when I provided proof of his whereabouts. That little weasel, growled Helen Martinez, who'd lost $50,000 in his solar panel startup. I knew he was hiding somewhere. My lawyer said we'd need a private investigator to track him down. Consider the investigation complete, I said. I'm also sending you evidence of his current lifestyle. Social media posts showing expensive purchases, restaurant visits, luxury items, all while claiming bankruptcy. By noon, I'd contacted 7 investors. By 2 o'clock, they were forming a collective lawsuit. By 3, they had a conference call scheduled with their legal teams. I sat back in my home office surrounded by papers and screenshots. listening to my phone ring with updates. Each call brought more satisfaction than the last. "Mr. Anonymous," Davidson said when he called back, "I don't know who you are, but you've given us exactly what we needed. We're filing emergency motions to freeze his accounts and seize any assets we can find. How quickly can you move?" "We're talking days, not weeks. Christmas might be very interesting for Mr. Brooks." I filed away Davidson's business card with the others, creating a neat stack of consequences. For 20 years, Nicholas had lived without facing accountabilities for his actions. That was about to change. The phone rang again. This time it was Helen Martinez. "Our lawyers are coordinating with the others. We're going to hit him from all sides simultaneously. No more hiding. No more games." "I'm glad I could help." "One more thing," she said. "When we find him, and we will find him, I want to thank you properly. You've given us hope when we thought all was lost." I hung up and stared out at the Lincoln streets, where my son thought he was safe, where he thought he could continue his schemes without consequence. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world crisp and clear, perfect visibility for what was coming next. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to the local news station. If Nicholas wanted to play games with other people's money, perhaps it was time Lincoln knew what kind of neighbor they had. With alliances forming, I drove out the following afternoon to gather the final piece of evidence I needed. St. Elizabeth's Hospital sat on the east side of Lincoln, its brick facade dusted with snow, and I parked in the visitor lot with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The automatic doors whooshed open, releasing that familiar antiseptic smell that always reminded me of my own heart surgery years ago, the one Nicholas hadn't bothered to visit me for. I walked through the lobby, my footsteps echoing on polished floors, past families clutching flowers in worry. I found Janet Morrison in the medical records office, a woman I'd known since my accounting days when I'd handled the books for her late husband's dental practice. She looked up from her computer with surprise. "Stanley Brooks? What brings you here on a day like this?" "Hello, Janet. I need a favor, and I know this is delicate territory." Her expression shifted to wariness. "What kind of favor?" I pulled out a business card from Davidson's firm. "I'm helping with a fraud investigation. There's a woman claiming cancer treatments she never received, collecting donations under false pretenses. Lives are being affected." Janet studied the card, then looked back at me. "Stanley, you know I can't just—" "Madeline Brooks, my ex-wife." The words tasted bitter. "She's been running a scam on social media, claiming chemotherapy treatments that never happened. Good people are sending money they can't afford because they believe she's dying." Something shifted in Janet's eyes. She'd always been a woman who valued honesty above bureaucracy. "This stays between us," she said quietly. 20 minutes later, I sat in my car reviewing the printouts. Clean medical history going back 5 years. Routine checkups, dental cleanings, a minor sinus infection last spring. Not one oncology appointment. No chemotherapy. No cancer diagnosis of any kind. The fluorescent hospital lights cast stark shadows across the papers as I read every detail. Each page confirmed what I'd already known. Madeline's entire cancer story was fabricated. Every donation, every sympathy message, every prayer sent her way was based on an elaborate lie. I tucked the records into my coat pocket, feeling their weight against my chest like armor. The drive home through Lincoln's quiet streets gave me time to process what I'd uncovered. Snow fell steadily, coating the world in white, making everything look clean and new. For a moment, sitting at a red light, I wondered if I was crossing ethical lines. These were private medical records, obtained through personal connections rather than proper channels. But then I thought of the families sending $20 bills they couldn't spare, believing they were helping a dying woman fight for her life. The light turned green and I drove on. Sometimes justice required getting your hands dirty. Back home, I placed the records in my folder next to the investor information and lawsuit confirmations. 3 separate angles of attack, all carefully orchestrated, all perfectly timed. Nicholas and Madeline had spent 20 years believing they were smarter than everyone around them. Tomorrow would test that theory. I glanced out my kitchen window, where Christmas lights twinkled in neighbors' windows, and allowed myself a smile. The holiday season was about to become very interesting for the Brooks family. The phone rang one more time that evening. I let it go to voicemail, already knowing it would be Nicholas or Madeline with another urgent request or manufactured crisis. But their time for making demands was running out. After tomorrow, they'd be too busy dealing with consequences to bother their poor, forgotten father. I poured myself a cup of coffee and settled in to review my plans one final time. Christmas morning was only hours away. Christmas dawned crisp and clear, and I gathered myself for what would be the most satisfying holiday in 20 years. I dressed carefully, not too formal, not too casual, and drove across town to the address Nicholas had texted me weeks ago. The house sat in a newer development, all vinyl siding and identical landscaping, with Christmas lights strung unevenly across the porch. I could see shapes moving behind the windows, probably Madeline fussing over last-minute preparations, while Nicholas counted imaginary profits from his fictional investment opportunity. I rang the doorbell, arranging my face into what I hoped looked like grandfatherly enthusiasm. "Dad!" Nicholas opened the door with arms spread wide, as if we'd been having weekly dinners for years instead of radio silence. "You made it! Come in, come in!" Madeline appeared behind him, thinner than I remembered, but with that same calculating look in her eyes. "Stanley, oh, it's so wonderful to see you. You look prosperous." I stepped into their warm living room, noting the expensive furniture that didn't quite match, the oversized television, the designer bags carelessly draped over chairs, all purchased with other people's money, no doubt. "Thank you for having me," I said, hanging my coat on their rack. "I brought something special for later. A surprise for both of you." Their eyes lit up immediately. "A surprise?" Madeline clasped her hands together. "How thoughtful." We sat down to dinner at a table that could have fed 12, loaded with dishes that looked impressive but tasted like they'd come from the grocery store deli. Nicholas carved the turkey with theatrical flourish, while Madeline filled wine glasses and peppered me with questions about my recovery from the cryptocurrency losses. "So fortunate that you managed to bounce back," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "These market fluctuations can be so unpredictable." "Indeed they can," I agreed, cutting my turkey into precise pieces, "but I've learned to be more careful about who I trust with financial advice." Nicholas launched into a detailed explanation of his AI investment opportunity, complete with projected returns and timeline urgency. I nodded along, asking questions that made me sound interested, while watching their faces grow more animated, with each perceived sign of my willingness to invest. The knock came just as Madeline was serving dessert. Sharp, authoritative, the kind of knock that meant business. Nicholas frowned, setting down his fork. I wasn't expecting anyone. He walked to the front door, Madeline and I trailing behind. Through the window I could see a man in a dark coat holding an envelope. "Nicholas Brooks?" the man asked when the door opened. "Yes?" "You've been served." He handed over the envelope and turned to leave. Nicholas stared at the papers, his face draining of color as he read. This can't be right." "What is it, honey?" Madeline peered over his shoulder. "It's a lawsuit. Multiple lawsuits. The investors, they found me." His hands shook as he flipped through pages of legal documents. Emergency asset freezes, demands for restitution, criminal fraud allegations. How did they even know where I was? His voice cracked slightly. I maintained my concerned grandfather expression while internally savoring every moment of his panic. "Oh no," Madeline said, reading over his shoulder. "Stanley, this is terrible timing. Right during Christmas dinner. These things have a way of catching up with people," I observed mildly. Nicholas was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. "I need to call my lawyer. No, I need to get out of here. They could freeze everything. The house, the accounts, everything." "How much do they want?" Madeline asked. $2 million, plus damages, plus interest." He looked like he might be sick. Madeline turned to me with that familiar expression I remembered from our marriage, the one that appeared whenever she needed something expensive. "Stanley," she said carefully, "I know this is awkward, but Nicholas is family, our son, and with your recent good fortune, maybe you could help with the legal fees, just until this gets sorted out." She reached for her phone, probably to start calculating exactly how much she thought she could extract from me. I smiled at her, the same patient smile I'd worn for 20 years of manipulation and dismissal. "Actually, Madeline, I think you're going to have bigger problems than legal fees very soon. She looked up from her phone, pausing mid-dial. What do you mean? I know someone who specializes in fraud cases, she said, her voice taking on that determined tone I remembered from our marriage. A Facebook friend, brilliant lawyer, handles these kinds of situations all the time. She opened her phone and navigated to Facebook, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. I watched her face, knowing what was coming, but curious to see how it would unfold. The first notification badge showed 97 messages. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, but she wasn't concerned yet. Popular people got lots of messages, especially during the holidays. Then she started scrolling. What the hell? She whispered, her face going pale as she read. The phone trembled in her hands. Madeline, what is it? Nicholas leaned over her shoulder, lawsuit papers forgotten. They're saying I faked having cancer. Look at these comments. Fraud. Scammer. Disgusting. There are hundreds of them. I sipped my coffee and watched the show unfold. She scrolled faster, her breathing becoming shallow. There's a news article. Lincoln woman exposed for fake cancer scam. How did they... Who would... Nicholas grabbed the phone and read aloud. Anonymous source provides medical records proving Madeline Brooks never received cancer treatment, despite collecting thousands in donations for chemotherapy costs. This can't be happening, Madeline's voice cracked. Someone hacked my medical records. This is illegal. Is it true? Nicholas asked, his voice deadly quiet. Of course it's not true. I'm fighting cancer. You know I'm fighting cancer. But even as she said it, I could see the doubt creeping into Nicholas's eyes. He was many things, but he wasn't stupid. The medical records were too detailed, too official to be fabricated. Jesus, Mom. Jesus Christ. Do you know what this means? They're going to investigate everything. My lawsuits, your donations, all of it. Madeline's phone buzzed with another notification, then another. The messages were pouring in now. Former donors demanding refunds. Reporters requesting interviews. Authorities asking questions. Make it stop, she whispered, staring at the screen. Make it stop. I can't make it stop, Nicholas snapped. You did this. You brought this on us. I didn't do anything. Someone set me up. They turned to me simultaneously, as if suddenly remembering I was there. Their faces showed a mixture of desperation and hope, the same expression I'd seen countless times when they'd needed something from me. Stanley, Madeline said, her voice becoming honeyed despite the panic, you said you had a surprise for us. Please tell me you brought what we discussed. The money for Nicholas's investment? We need it now more than ever. Nicholas nodded eagerly. Dad, I know this looks bad, but we can fix this. With your help, we can hire the best lawyers, the best public relations firms. We can make this all go away. I stood up slowly, setting my coffee cup down with deliberate care. Their eyes followed my every movement, hungry and desperate. Actually, I have delivered your surprise already. The words hung in the air like smoke. I walked to the coat rack and pulled on my jacket, taking my time with each button. What do you mean? Madeline's voice was sharp with rising panic. I mean exactly what I said. I've already given you what you deserve. But the money, Nicholas started. There is no money, not for you. I walked to the door, their confused voices following me. Stanley, wait! You can't just leave. We need to talk about this. But I was already turning the handle, stepping out into the cold Nebraska night. The door closed behind me with a soft click, cutting off their pleas and protests. I walked to my car without looking back, though I could see the warm glow of their living room window in my peripheral vision. Inside, they were probably still trying to process what had just happened, still believing they could manipulate their way out of consequences. The engine started smoothly, and I pulled away from the curb. In my rearview mirror, I saw a figure appear at the window. Nicholas, probably, watching me disappear into the darkness. 20 years of silence. 20 years of dismissal. 20 years of treating me like I didn't exist. Now they knew exactly how that felt. Days blurred into weeks, and reports trickled in through Lincoln's tight-knit network of gossip and genuine concern. The story had legs, as they say in the news business, and it ran far and wide. Janet from the hospital called first. Stanley, I hope I did the right thing. The authorities contacted me about those records. Turns out someone had anonymously tipped them off about the fraud. I'm sure you handled it appropriately, I said, stirring sugar into my morning coffee. The local news picked it up, then the state papers. Something about it just caught people's attention. Maybe the audacity of faking cancer for money. Other updates came through chance encounters at the grocery store, casual conversations with neighbors, fragments of information that painted a picture of systematic collapse. Nicholas's court battles had been swift and brutal. The investors, armed with evidence and fueled by righteous anger, had presented an airtight case. The judge had shown no mercy for someone who'd stolen retirement funds and college savings to finance a lifestyle of lies. Lost everything, reported Tom Harrison, whose law firm had handled some of the paperwork. House, car, bank accounts. Had to move back in with his mother, if you can believe that. But Madeline's situation was arguably worse. The cancer fraud had struck a nerve with the public in ways Nicholas's investor schemes never could. People could understand bad business deals, but faking terminal illness crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Her Facebook page had become a wasteland of angry comments and demands for refunds. The local news had run a follow-up story about how her fake treatments had coincided with promoted miracle cures and unproven supplements, suggesting she'd been profiting from desperate people's hope in multiple ways. Fraud charges are likely, mentioned Carol from the library, where I'd started volunteering on Tuesday mornings. The district attorney's office is taking it seriously. But the most satisfying update came from an unexpected source. The mail carrier, a young woman named Sarah, who'd been following the story, stopped by my house with a package and couldn't help sharing what she'd seen. I delivered a bunch of registered letters to that address yesterday, she said, referring to Nicholas's house. Legal documents, by the look of them. The woman who answered the door, his mother, I think. She looked like she'd aged 10 years. I thanked her and went inside, feeling something I hadn't experienced in decades, complete peace. The spring that followed was a revelation. I discovered that freedom from resentment was like recovering from a long illness. Suddenly the world had color again. I took my first real vacation in years, driving through the Rocky Mountains, staying in small towns where nobody knew my story. In Colorado, I met a retired teacher named Margaret, who told me about her volunteer work with literacy programs. By the time I returned to Lincoln, I'd signed up to help adults learn to read. It felt good to build something instead of just tearing down. The community center where I volunteered was full of people who'd faced real challenges, job loss, family problems, health issues, and had chosen to move forward instead of backward. Their resilience put my own struggles in perspective. "You seem different," observed Father Martinez from St. Mary's, where I'd started attending again. Lighter somehow. He was right. The weight I'd carried for 20 years had lifted, leaving room for things I'd forgotten I enjoyed. Books, long walks, conversations with people who valued honesty over profit. I still lived in the same modest house, still drove the same reliable Honda. But now these things felt like choices rather than limitations. I had enough money to live anywhere, do anything, but I'd discovered that satisfaction came from different sources than I'd expected. One evening in May, as I was planning a trip to visit the Grand Canyon, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Nicholas's number, but I let it go to voicemail. Later, I listened to his message, a rambling apology mixed with subtle requests for financial help. I deleted it without a second thought. The next morning, I packed my suitcase and loaded my car with maps and travel guides. The Grand Canyon could wait, though. First, I was going to drive through Kansas, where I'd heard about a small town that needed help rebuilding after a tornado. It felt good to have somewhere to go, someone to help. It felt good to be needed for the right reasons. As I pulled out of my driveway, I glanced once at the house where I'd spent so many years waiting for a phone call that never came. Now I understood that I'd been waiting for the wrong thing entirely. The road ahead was empty and full of possibilities. I pressed the accelerator and drove toward whatever came next, leaving the past where it belonged, in the rearview mirror, growing smaller with each mile. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.